This is Rock Leach with Social Fire. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a few things today because on a recent episode of the Social Fire podcast, I had on there Dr. Phil Yarborough. Now, Dr. Phil Yarborough is a very educated, intelligent brother, over 25 plus years as a pastor, as a developmental psychologist, background and all those things, Christian counseling and psychology. I mean, he's got the background and definitely the resume and education. I was very glad that I was able to get him on there, being busy as he is. But we talked about a lot of things, and we talked about one conversation that's not talked about much in the church. As a matter of fact, we don't talk about it enough. You don't want to miss this video. Now, in this conversation, it was real, y'all. I'm gonna be honest with you; it was real. And if you hadn't been over to the Social Fire podcast, we actually have the playlist on this channel as well. But you're gonna soon be able to find those that podcast footage. You're gonna be able to find it on all the major podcast outlets such as Spotify, Apple, different things of that nature. You'll be able to find it there. But in this conversation, we talked about the conversation of divorce. Now, here's the thing. Divorce is something that we all know about. Marriage is something that we all know about. But here's the reality. Nobody ever starts their marriage with an expiration date in mind. Nobody does that. Nobody does. Nobody does that. We'll have these lavish weddings. We'll do all of those things. And many times we'll put more time into the wedding, more money into the wedding, more energy into the wedding than we did into the marriage. Now, there are a lot of people that are guilty of that. And I am definitely not standing here from a condescending standpoint because I myself have gone through a divorce. I myself have. And so we talked about a lot of things. And when I say I come from a biblical understanding and was able to put my own transparency out there in this, I want to call it a podcast, but it almost seemed like Dr. Yarborough was actually counseling me. I mean, I'm just saying, all my dirty laundry ended up getting out on this podcast because he was just blessing me so much. But we pressed on a few things here. And I just want to give you a little bit of this because I asked him about what is the proper age to get married? Because I was married very early. He admitted that he himself was married at a very early age. And he brought up a powerful point about marriage and when you should that I hadn't heard before. I'm just going to be real with you. And so I want to make sure we listen to this. Let's get into the video. Let's go. Okay. So I know when you talk about divorce, let's just keep it 100 right here. When you talk about divorce, I remember going through Barnes and Noble. I'm an avid reader and I write as well. But I was looking at this book one day and it was called LAPD. And that was the name of the book, LAPD, but there was an acronym that said Life After a Painful Divorce. And I was like, wow, most folk don't like to talk about divorce because of the pain, because of the trauma, because of the letdown, because of all of those things, the shame, the guilt and shame. And from my perspective, I always tell people guilt is when you hate what you did. Shame is when you hate who you are, and that's a process most folk go through. Let me ask you something first. Dr. Yarborough, let me go ahead and put this out here. I've been married before. Let's just go ahead. I know Social Fire. I talk about my wife. I love my wife. I make it obvious. And I know it's because I've been married before. There are things that I do now because I have a greater understanding than I had before. I was married at 22 years old. Give me a little self a sound there. Dr. Yarborough, I got married at 22 years old. She had just turned 21. I believe at that age, it's safe to say, I didn't.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. When do you advise folk to get married? I mean, it's just from that perspective right there.
I don't get into specific age ranges, but what I do is get into levels of maturity.
Come on.
And what I talk about when I counsel couples in premarital counseling is their emotional maturity, their spiritual maturity, their financial maturity, and their social maturity. If they don't have those four aspects of maturity, they're not mature enough to know what marriage is about.
How often is that happening? I mean, how often? Now, I'm gonna stop the video just for a moment. Did you hear those levels of maturity that he talked about? Because True maturity is not about the number of years you've been on earth. It's not about how old you are, because you can find some people who are up in age that are childish. Let's just go ahead and be, makes me think of the scripture. When I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child, understood as a child. But when I became a man, I put childish things away. And when we say man there, that's not saying man from a gender bias. That's saying anthropos. When I came into my human maturity, I put childish things away. And what he brought up here defies an age. And I get that he said that he's not making it about age. He doesn't really go on an age. But those four things there: emotional maturity, financial maturity, social maturity, just going through all those things. There were four of them. He talked about all those things. Those are important. But we went ahead. I actually pressed him a little bit here, just to talk a little more. Pressed him a little bit here, and I want to go back and rewind it just a little bit because I want y'all to get this whole pressing thing. Let's go. Happening. I mean, how often are people getting married without them things in place? Be real. Be real.
Every day. Like you, I've been married before. I got married at 24 years old. Wasn't in the church. Wanted nothing to do with Christ. Neither was my ex-wife. We met in basic training in Alabama. 4 years later, got married, had children, and ended up divorced after 7.5-year marriage. And my head was flipped around, and I thought I knew something and found out I didn't.
Let me ask you this. Was the pain and devastation just as great as it was as being a leader? Because the pain for me, having a level of influence, like Yarborough, having a level of influence, people, they switch sides. I took the blame publicly. I just took the blame. If I'm the leader of this household and it didn't work, I take the blame because I didn't want people trying to figure out, investigate. I just went ahead and raised my hand and say, hey, I made the mistake. You get what I'm saying? Now that may not have been the right thing. That's just where I was at that moment, just kind of wanting to, get people away from that. And this was trying to function. I don't even know if I want to say that was damage control. I didn't have influence like that. But when you got members and stuff like that involved, was the pain, because you weren't in church at this phase, right?
Right.
Was the pain and devastation, you think that it was just as great?
It was. It definitely was, because I wasn't in the church setting, but I was a community influencer. I was big into community activism. I did youth mentorship in my community for at-risk boys, and it became very public because of that position.
Wow. Did it affect the position? I'm sorry to jump in there. Did it affect your position?
It affected my position because of the mental stress it put on me. I loved my wife. I loved my children. And at the time, I had wife, children, and an invalid father to take care of. I was working insane hours, but I take the blame of what I did was in being a workaholic, one. Two, being an alcoholic due to my PTSD when I came home from the Gulf War. That put a strain on the marriage.
Okay, so there are a lot of things, and I was glad that he went down through there, y'all. This podcast, this episode, and I'm going to actually link it at the end of the video, the end screen. This was phenomenal. And we didn't stop there. We went down through there. And as the video kept going, the podcast kept going, Dr. Yarborough just went heavier and heavier. And I'm just like I am. I'm going to ask more questions. We're putting it out there. And looked like the farther we went, the more things I ended up with all kind of laundry just kind of everywhere, because it was just such a great interview. This was a great interview. And so it is that word, the divorce, that we need to talk about. Now, there are a lot of people that have experienced trauma, that have experienced setbacks, that are even, instead of it making them better, it made them bitter, and there's a lot of conversation that we don't talk about, especially in leadership. When leaders get divorced, pastors get divorced, it is a hard thing on the members because their champions has a crack in the armor. That's what they see, you all. And then when you go through divorce, what about those people who are looking at your marriage as strength for their own marriage? I mean, it's a letdown to a lot of people. And, you have to go through all of that, carrying all of that weight. And we talked about all of that. But I want to know what you think about it. Get down in the comments, and y'all go check out the podcast. It is amazing. Let's get in the comments. Let's go.